we're getting to the end of the summer. We're in the last week of August, and I've gone back to school, and so for me, summer vacation's over, and we are ending the whole summer reading cycle, I think. And at the beginning of the summer, I did a video about the stack of books I had before me to read that I've been meaning to read for a long time, and I'll link that at the end of this video so you can take a look if you're interested. But I haven't read any of those books except for one. I got a copy of A Room with a View in paperback to take with me to Italy because I didn't want to take the big heavy book I was reading, which is this one I'm going to talk about in a second. But also I thought it'd be fun to read A Room with a View because it's about a trip to Italy and touring Italy, and so I thought, well, that'll be perfect. And I loved the movie, so I wanted to see, how accurate the book was to the movie, vice versa. And it turns out that movie is really accurate to the book, more so than most things I've ever read and then seen a movie version of. So I think this is a case where the people who love the book will say, oh, the movie was as good as the book. And I think that's the case with Merchant Ivory movies. Their film version of the book, Morris, is also quite accurate. So I think they do a good job with that. But it's hard to take a novel and stick it into a movie. They're different monsters. They're different medium. You can't do it most of the time. So if you come to the book first, you're always going to be disappointed in the movie most of the time. I often see a movie and then think, oh, I'd like to read the book. And then I'm not really disappointed in the movie because I came to the movie first, and the book is like an enhancement of what I know from the movie. So going the other direction, maybe it's just more satisfying. I don't know. But it is for me. And so that brings me to a topic because I went to see a movie, and then I saw it again on Amazon Prime at the beginning of the summer called Benediction, and it's about the British poet Siegfried Sassoon, who wrote a lot about World War I in his poetry. He survived World War I, and he was gay, and his two prominent boyfriends that he had, Ivor Novello, who was the musical theater and film star of the 20s, and he wrote songs and wrote musicals and was in musicals and was in movies, and they had a relationship for a time, and then after that there was a relationship with a person named Stephen Tennant, and in this movie the character of Stephen Tennant is rather prominent, and I thought, who is this person? And I just thought, let's Google him, and all these pictures popped up, and it turns out he was a rather prominent person amongst the Bright Young Things, as they were called. The Bright Young Things is the theme of my reading for the summer, as it turns out, because of seeing this movie. And there's also, by the way, a movie called Bright Young Things about this era. It's a sort of fictionalized version, but I love the 1920s. But it led me to this boyfriend of Sassoon's, Stephen Tennant. And so when I was looking into him, I saw that there was a biography, and it was well regarded. And so I thought, John Waters gave it a great review. And John Waters' sense of humor, I think, okay, he must think that this was a really fun read. And so I thought, it's going to be fun, maybe dishy, something. But actually, it's rather heavy and thick, you see. I found a used copy of it. It's called Serious Pleasures by Philip Hoare, H-O-A-R-E. Hoare. So anyway, it took me a long time to get through it, but there's lots of photographs in it, which is nice, and it's a thorough account of this person's life. Well, so the lucky thing is, Stephen Tennant wrote diaries, so there's all the diaries. He was friends with all kinds of people who also wrote diaries and talk about him. So the wealth of material that's out there to put a biography together of this person was extraordinary, and so you can have a nice, well-researched book with a lot of accurate quotes from the person that it's about. Interesting, he didn't produce that much material. He was a painter and an illustrator, and he also wrote poetry, but he didn't produce a lot of work. And he was born into wealth and privilege. He inherited an estate that he lived on in England, a country manor, and maintained that through his life. He lived into old age and outlived a lot of his friends, even though he had tuberculosis and a lot of illness through his life. He was always going off somewhere for a better climate so he could recoup, and then he'd go back to England where it was damp, and he really shouldn't have been living there, but that was his home. So but he travels all around the world with the most interesting people. One of his best friends is Cecil Beaton, who is the celebrity photographer and Broadway and West End costume and set designer, movie designer as well. Cecil Beaton also wrote a very famous diaries because they've been published and they're really fun to read. I used to have a copy of a sort of curated version of his diaries with like the best of chapters, and there was a great chapter about him working on the musical Coco, about Coco Chanel starring Katharine Hepburn. And when he accepted the job, they said, well, Hepburn's going to be in it, and he thought they were talking about Audrey Hepburn, who actually would have been a great choice for Coco Chanel. Way better, actually, than in terms of being like the person than Katharine Hepburn. But he hated Katharine Hepburn, and his chapter about that is hilarious. Okay, but Ivor Novello is a major person in the life of Sassoon as well. And I already had this book, Ivor Novello, Portrait of a Star, by who? Paul Webb. It's interesting to read about his life. Another openly gay person. So the other thing about the Bright Young Things is, though there's a mix of people, there's a lot of gay men in that group who are able to live quite openly. In fact, and Stephen Tennant from Serious Pleasures is always open about his sexuality. So there was a lot of the Oxford-educated gay young men of the 20s and 30s went off to Berlin, where there was a kind of a gay liberation going on before Hitler came in and stopped it all. And so you get Christopher Isherwood going over there, and Christopher Isherwood, who wrote the Berlin Stories, is intersecting with these people as well, the Bright Young Things. And he is a bright young thing, but he moves to America and sort of becomes Americanized in a way. But he intersects with, before I go on to that, so in this book, Serious Pleasures, I'm reading that a lot of quotes are coming from sort of a historical fiction book called The Temple by Stephen Spender, different person, who is writing about basically himself. He's changing the names and he's changing. But it's sort of autobiographical, but formed into a story. Interestingly, when he wrote this, it was so frank about the all the main characters are his friends who are gay, and they go to Berlin and they live kind of an open life, and their loves and their pursuit of art and everything that Germany has to offer in culture at that time. It's a nice supplement to the Berlin Stories because it's more of that era and that what was going on then before Hitler comes in. But he couldn't publish it at the time because it was so frank. Whereas the Berlin Stories, Christopher Isherwood's story, the main character, who's basically him, is sort of asexual. You don't understand, the sexuality is sort of there underneath. And not explicit, so he could get that published. But this is a little more explicit. So it was in the 1980s when he discovered somebody had a copy of it in an archive, and he got a copy of it and looked at it and then reworked it because it was unfinished, and then published it in the 80s. So this has not been out that long, but it's from the point of view of somebody from 1929, 1930. And it's a interesting historical read, and connects with the Bright Young Things group. So I read that next, and so I just finished this. now I'm on a book called Desert Fury, which is, there's a movie, a film noir movie that I like, and I got a used copy of Desert Fury, and I'm really enjoying that. And when I finish that, I have a book that came that's about Al Hirschfeld, rather thick biography about Hirschfeld. Hirschfeld is the illustrator from the New York Times who illustrated caricatures of everybody on Broadway and in the movies from the 20s to the 2000s. There's a theater named after him now. So he's an important person of theater and an important illustrator. He's not connected to the Bright Young Things. Though he starts out in the 20s, he's of their age, and he just survived. Connected to the Bright Young Things, so that takes care of what I actually read over the summer. I except for Room with a View, I didn't read that big. All those books are still waiting for me, and I will get to them. But I also got interested in George Platt Lyons because there's a documentary about him. He's a photographer. A lot of his works were suppressed, and I found this used photography book of his pictures. But the Kinsey Foundation, I don't know what you call it, the Kinsey Society, they saved... Dr. Kinsey did his famous study of sexuality, and he knew George Platt Lyons and was the person who saved all of his photographs, which had a lot of scandalous content for the time, the ones that he wasn't using commercially, magazines and so on. And it's a great archive of photographs from a time, and they are unexpected, these photographs. But anyway, I have this used book. It's not on the market anymore. One of the other Bright Young Things, Cecil Beaton, who's great friends with Stephen Tennant of this book I read. There's more I could read on him, but years ago I read his diary part of it. But I recently, I don't know, a year ago, got this huge coffee table book, Cecil Beaton. It says Beaton on the side. And inside, it's just, you need a library table to read this. Just, you can't casually pick this up. It's really heavy. You can't sit it on your lap. You need a table. And it just has a curated excerpts of his scrapbooks. In here, there's a lot of personal family photos and photos of friends on trips, mixed in with magazine clippings of everyone from the 20s through the 60s and the 70s even. And so he's just everything that inspires him. So it was just kind of neat to look through and say, oh, what inspired this guy? Because he did the costumes for My Fair Lady and Camelot and Coco, the Coco Chanel musical, and other plays and things in the West End, and tons of photography, fashion photography, portrait photography. He was Queen Elizabeth's main photographer when she was younger, and did a lot of royalty photography. But it's interesting how he intersects with all of these other artists. It's kind of, a lot of the people are well-to-do, and that's how they were allowed to have the sort of artistic careers they had. They just had the means, but not everybody. But it is fascinating stuff. It's a world in which doesn't exist anymore, of art and culture, and a window into what it was like to be gay at a time when most people wouldn't even talk about it. So it's sort of eye-opening. Anyway, that's what I have today. Thanks for watching. I think maybe I'll do another book review after I get some more reading done, maybe out of that stack that I haven't touched, but I keep getting diverted, and this time Hirschfeld. That's what's next.